1. Background. I served in the military for 13 years as a legal specialist and court reporter. All of my IT experience is me figuring it out using Google and guessing. Got out and was immediately hired for an IT job that they rewrote a little, so I could also do cool court reporter stuff with some AI and fancy audio equipment. I've been doing that for 3 years as of last month. This story isn't about the court stuff, that's going swimmingly. FYI, there is some nifty speech-to-text stuff out there, but I digress. We'll start a few years before I got out. I was working in a place with a civilian IT guy. He was supposed to have a supervisor, but that position had been vacant for years. It was a 4-person department and he was flying solo. He quit, and I ended up taking over what was explained to me as his daily job. Basic help desk stuff. Mapping profiles, network permissions, group email account management, phone transfers, etc. Very small potatoes. Again, no new hires, and I did this by myself for an office of about 60 for 2 years. I got out and was asked if I wanted to come back as the new civilian IT guy. The pay was good, and I didn't have to move, and I already knew the staff and assets, so I accepted. They also finally hired a supervisor's position, a guy with a lot of management experience. About 6 months after we started, we got a call from the enterprise-level guys. They were informing us that they were shutting down a system we were supposed to be managing because it hadn't been authorized or recertified in 7 years. It was an aging Lotus Domino server, around 23 databases, each with tens of thousands of records that, oh by the way, are mandated by Congress to keep for 10 years. It was a homebrew setup, no support or maintenance except for what the every 3-year rotating people had Googled enough to fix some issue. So many busted agents and looping actions, an email notification system rigged to a commercial email rerouter that no one had the login credentials for. The admin in the ACL were long since retired, and here I was with zero clue except someone once said, "He's good at computer stuff." Luckily, my supervisor knew exactly what was wrong and how to submit the paperwork to fix it, and he thought it would be a good idea to have me do it so I could learn. Great idea. So I slowly got a package together, submitted it, and it failed. Immediately. Expire this, outdated that, tons of security flaws in the web interface. Ended up teaching myself what a salted hash was, deleting all 3,000 users' passwords and creating a temp login reset so anytime someone logged in with a black password field, they had to set a new password. First bullet dodged, then disaster struck several times. First, some new laws required that we save more data than before and make it more accessible. The leadership at the time threw together a little group to figure out what to do. We had a broken system, constant server crashes, no support, and new requirements. Oh, and no money. So they decided, over my hesitant objection, that this looks like it could be done in SharePoint. And some consult company totally sold them on it. SharePoint was free for us using an enterprise license, and Pranal Ak is good at computer stuff, he can figure it out. So the decision was made. Second, the first SharePoint developer we hired rage quit because the PM was too critical. The next dev had some really unique ways to do stuff that we later learned no one else could figure out, and had to be scrapped once we finally got more devs. Then the PM quit, then the second dev quit, then the second PM quit, then my supervisor quit. Got a better offer somewhere else and dipped about halfway through the build of the on-site collections. So, after teaching a half-dozen non-legal people the entire legal process multiple times, several requirements, gathering sessions, and storyboarding and all that, we finally get the basic site collection built. Now it's time to migrate. Migrating Lotus Notes data into SharePoint lists is a nightmare. Not only did we bust the threshold limits immediately, list column limitations forced us to make 30 separate lists to house nearly 1,200 data fields plus attachments. The SharePoint host nearly declined our site when we reached out with what we were trying to do. ended up purchasing some software to make it a little easier and migrating everything mostly successfully. There was one small piece of the Lotus Note stuff still active on the server. It finally was migrated recently, and now I am free of this burden. But now my problems really started, you see. When the original Domino server was set up, and the Notes databases registered in our lifecycle management tool, they were listed under a special type of system, so we could get better funding for it. This came back to bite me in the cheeks because those special systems are built to be permanent and to have secretariat-level oversight on budgeting and management. So, in order to stop having people constantly badgering me because the system was so out of date, it was set up to be removed from the network. I had to convince several levels of bureaucracy that the system didn't exist anymore, even though the program name still existed because the old supervisor of mine thought it would be a good idea to name the SharePoint the exact same program name, hence forcing it to inherit all of its red tape and security requirements. During this time, Lotus Domino, now IBM Domino, was sold to a company overseas, and the network security folks were adamant that it be shut down immediately. So, stuck between NOSC and a congressional data capture mandate, I did the only thing I could think of. Cracked open some old policy documents and started learning how one could decommission one of these special systems. After several weeks and investigation and a boatload of people wanting to each see for themselves a new SharePoint site and how it was used, and was there any API or cloud storage or anything extra that kept it in the enterprise definition of a system, 2 or more hardware and software components used in conjunction, and thus keeping the old rules and red tape in place. Today I have finally got the all clear to shut down the old Domino server and recategorize this special project. It's been an exhausting journey, but I learned a lot. I don't think anyone in my office has any idea how close we came to losing the last 10 years of data, and what it took to move everything and change the categorization. But I know, and now I can rest easy and get back to what my job description actually is. If you stuck around this long, thanks for listening. 2. Preface. I used to work for a small company, step above a startup but still considered a small to medium business, that had massive growth since their start. A lot of the first employees were still there and made sure that was known. This place at times felt like a typical day of high school, very cliquish, cutthroat and childish behavior. I worked here as part-time IT, with borderline full-time hours, and when I was hired, it was a tightly run ship. IT director was pretty much there part-time, while the senior sysadmin and senior support engineer covered 95% of the gaps. After the IT director left, the senior sysadmin was named the new IT director. Mistake number 1. We hired a new sysadmin, and senior support engineer was also doing sysadmin type work. Company was still going through massive growth and at one point was even talking expansion. However, one fateful summer the person in charge of the new expansion immediately quit, and a few months later 3 people were laid off. Looks like the company took a gamble and lost big time. The rollout. During this bit of chaos, IT got the approval to perform a laptop refresh. The equipment that we were using was easily 6 years old and had taken a lot of abuse. Laptops were often dropped, scuffed, mishandled, executed. One VIP managed to execute his laptop every Christmas, and it was difficult to keep up with the mess that we had. Every full-timer was going to get a new laptop, keyboard, mouse, docking station, and monitors. It was a major undertaking, but after a few bumps, we were able to get things going and finish the rollout. During one team meeting, I heard that while the rollout was a success, some corners had to be cut. Now, being the sole part-timer, I was not allowed to know why. This was an issue since day one working there. I was typically excluded from meetings, info, etc. If I didn't dig into it and just figured with new equipment, people would be happy, and we didn't have to deal with crappy equipment again. The event. One evening, I was wrapping up and about to head out for the weekend, when all of a sudden, I get the call from 3 cubicles down. "Hey, Icebar, can you come over here for a few?" "What's going on?" "So, I was eating breakfast at my desk." "Oh no." Go on. And I may have spilled some syrup on my laptop. There was some evidence of syrup on the laptop, but it was still functional. Okay, let's get your documents saved and turn this thing off, and then I can get you set up with an old laptop until we figure out what to do. Don't worry about that, I'll just use the desktop I have. Fair enough. I take the laptop back, open a ticket in our system, and give the support engineer a heads up for Monday. He gives a laugh and confirms we will deal with it Monday. The Monday. I'm the first one in, and am handling my usual tasks of taming all the printers and feeding them the ink they desire, greedy bastards. Anyway, sysadmin comes in, and I decide to bring him up to speed. Hey, sysadmin, so unfortunately, poor soul may have broken his laptop. Geez, already? What happened? Claims he spilled syrup on it. Good grief. These things have no warranty. They don't have what now? Oh yeah, the IT director couldn't afford the extended warranty, so these things just have the basic 1 year and that's it. No accidental either. Well, crap. In comes the support engineer. Hey guys, where's the laptop? I hand it to him, and then get pulled into an AV setup for the executives. Roughly 2 hours go by before I return. I had to stay to make sure things ran smoothly. So when did the keyboard stop working? Not sure, it was still functioning Friday after the accident. I figured the syrup was making its way through the machine. It was only a matter of time. Okay, let's chat with the IT director. During our Monday meeting. So, Porcel spills syrup on his machine. Yep. Can I see the laptop? By this time, the machine will not turn on. It had met its fate. Okay, here's what we will do. Open a case with the vendor, tell them the machine will not power on. There's no physical evidence of syrup, so maybe they will just fix it and send it back. Do we have any warranty on these things? Nope, none at all, says the support engineer. We had to skip a few things to stay within budget. Just get this done and let me know of the status. I left the office disgusted. No sane person would have made that deal without the warranty, especially given past behavior. Way too much of a gamble to take, but yet here we are. I put in the claim, sent the laptop out, and a few weeks later, the vendor came back with their findings. Of course they found the syrup. So there goes any chance of free repair. I believe the repair bill totaled $532 to replace the motherboard and battery. It was still under the cost of the laptop, but management decided not to proceed with the repair. Epilogue. After that event, I lasted another 3 months before giving my 4 days' notice. I had received an offer for my current job and filled out the paperwork and had a start date. After I left, things just kept getting worse. Both sysadmin and support engineer left the team, so IT director had to quickly hire some part-timers to fill in the gap. A lot more people left the company, and eventually, the money basically ran dry and massive layoffs came. As of today, the company is closed for good, and not gonna lie, I'm happy it is. That place was a mess, and this story was just one of the terrible IT moments. 3. One of our clients started getting quite a bit of spam recently, more so than usual. But luckily, the really bad type of spam, so it's really obvious even to the more, not tech-literate staff. The really bad thing, however, is that the spam wasn't going to individual users but to their distribution lists. They have quite a few, most are internal use only, but some need to receive outside reports. One such distribution list they have is an all-staff, where every other distribution list is added. For whatever historical reasons, this was not set to be internal only from the start. I blame my old colleague for that, and also the client who probably agreed to leave it as such. They didn't really have a proper CTO back then, and was a bit hectic. So you can imagine, when one phishing email suddenly goes to over 500 users, it is a bad thing. Cue the actual dialogue. I get a ticket from the big boss man's PA to let us know of the email. I proceed with my usual search and purge from the portal, and then ask, "Hey, PA, do you guys really need this all staff to be open to the public? It would be much safer to make this internal use only." Now, I don't get a reply for 5 days. The week passes, and next week, a ticket comes in, follow-up to the original. "Hey, IT Help Desk, I've spoken with the CEO. Please make all our distribution lists internal only." Now, like I said before, most distribution lists are already private, but some absolutely need to be public for very important results and reports from third parties. One specific list belonging to a certain big money-making department would be devastated if even one of their results doesn't come through. And they deal with about 30 to 50 a minute. The catch: I was on lunch and one of our newer colleagues picked this up. In terms of the task required, he definitely has the knowledge and access to do it, but as always it's not that cut and dry. A pure chance I'm coming back in the office and passing my new colleague and see the ticket he's dealing with, and to bring him a coffee. I felt generous that day and got the office a coffee from the nice place at the corner. Lo and behold, I nearly dropped the tray and shouted, "Stop!" Poor guy flinched like I was gonna throw the coffee on his crotch. He had just started making the list private and was just about to do the very important department one. Phew. You have no idea how I went from being chilly coming from the outside to sweating like a fin in a sauna. I apologized to my guy for shouting and explained what he was just about to do, his face going pale. I asked him if he didn't mind assigning the ticket to me, as I was dealing with it last week, and I can put him on as a follower. So now to reply. PA, are you sure about that? Department X would literally implode, and the manager there would not only chew my head off, but the CEO's too, and you know he will. It would mean money lost in profits for just a few minutes of lost emails alone. Hold on a minute, let me check with the CEO and manager. 10 minutes later, I get a reply from the CTO in the ticket chain. Hey, ignore that please. Make all staff private for now, as well as distribution lists X and Y. Those don't get anything external. Please leave A and B and C public, and put a note to say that they are to never be made private, lest we don't want to get paid that month. This wasn't meant as a threat. She meant it as the loss of profits would cripple them, a bit kind of joke. I personally know CTO, and she has a good sense of humor along with a good head on her shoulders. And so I do make the description say that on the DL. If you make this distribution list private, we don't get paid by the client. Hopefully this will help the future generations at the company not make the mistake my colleague was about to. 4. So several years ago, I was in a role that required imaging and building systems. Thankfully, we used a commercial product that was able to network boot systems, laid out a baseline OS, then install software packages, updates, configuration files, corporate settings, etc. It worked quite well after I spent some time with the product, and on average, a complete system build could be completed in under an hour, under 45 minutes on average. A few tweaks for the individual users were needed afterwards, but these took about 5 to 10 minutes and worked nearly automatically, i.e. a desktop tech sets up the build process, clicks go, and watches and waits for the system to complete while answering email, gets coffee, whatever. They built a few dozen systems daily. I worked with the server and system build team, and had little to do or nothing to do with delivering systems to actual users. That was desktop support. A few months go by, and a manager for the desktop support group, P, faces criticism that her group takes much too long to get systems to users. Sometimes this was a few days, but sometimes a week or more. I'd heard complaints from her staff. They'd been forbidden to deploy any system to any user prior to either her or her assistant giving a look at the systems and renewing them for approval. This is where the long delay stemmed. This, of course, made no sense whatsoever, since each system had been built using the exact same process and were identical except host names and serial numbers. It was like insisting every individual muffin from a bakery face inspection before hitting the shelf. This manager didn't face criticism very well, and refused to acknowledge her individual approval was a waste of time and needlessly repetitive. So she blamed the build process for taking too long. What the fuck? The build process takes an hour and a single technician could do about 6 simultaneously. So, of course, a meeting is called to see what, if anything, can be done to speed up the build process and reduce the delays being complained about. As the meeting starts, I mention I've brought a laptop and have hooked it into a projector so we can all witness the build process, and attendees can actually watch it run while we talk. And I've brought a stopwatch as well. The manager goes into a diatribe about customer service, improving processes, collaboration between teams, yada yada, while people keep glancing at the projected bill process flying by without my touching a thing. This is where it gets weird. After nearly 30 minutes of her rambling, I'm finally allowed to pose a question, and I ask politely, "Excuse me, P, but where did you get the idea that the bill process was to blame? What was the impetus of the idea that the automatic bill took too long and is the cause of these delays?" Almost on cue, the laptop going through the build rebooted to finish off the last few installations, and did a system chime bing, showing it was restarting. She was startled and asked, "What was that?" I answered it was the laptop finishing off the build, and oh, by the way, according to the stopwatch, we're about 33 minutes into the meeting when I started the process. She was livid and demanded to know why I was using obscene language. Everyone in the meeting went silent and turned with quizzical faces toward Manager P. I paused, not sure what the hell she was talking about, and asked, "Excuse me? What obscene language?" She replied she wasn't going to repeat it, but was sure everyone else had heard me. Everyone started looking at each other, and again back to Manager P. As politely as I could, I asked, "P, I'm not quite sure what language you're referring to, but as we can all see, the system build is nearly done. We're not quite 40 minutes into the meeting according to the stopwatch, and every system is built using the same process, so could we possibly consider the necessity to review every system before it goes out to staff?" After some time, she relented that she'd reduce the reviews to a system a week, and make sure we're building the systems right, and her comment about language seemed to fade. A day later, I'm pulled into my manager's office and told I was being cited for using inappropriate language during the previous meeting. I'm shocked. What language? Can anyone tell me what I said that was inappropriate? I'm told that Manager P stated that I thought her idea was without merit and used a sexual innuendo to get a reaction. Huh? The fuck? So I ask, what sexual innuendo? The manager coughs and mutters, "She said you said her idea was impotent." My jaw dropped, and carefully I explained exactly what I'd in fact said was, what was the impetus of the idea? The manager closed his eyes and shakes his head. "Okay, let me just confirm with someone else at the meeting and we can put this to rest." A day later, my manager confirmed what I'd in fact asked about in the meeting, and had to have a polite but rather awkward conversation with Manager P on vocabulary. He asked me to please use simpler words when dealing with Manager P, okay? 5. Once upon a time in the not-so-distant past, I installed large-scale PBX phone systems in a number of southern states. It was one of those stores where this story takes place. I was working for a company whose phone system had an onboard computer system, complete with 8-inch floppies, and a distinct dislike for unsteady power. In order to appease the PBX gods, we had a strict list of requirements for the room environmentals and the power and grounding. The room needed to be clean and without excessive dust, with climate control, temperature in the 70-degree range on the Fahrenheit scale. Most of all, it needed dedicated 3-phase 208 VAC power, with a dedicated computer ground. This involved the XO lug on the power supply transformer and ideally included a link to a ground rod or building steel. The number of times I, a brash young guy in my mid-20s, had to inform a crusty old boy electrician that what he thought was a ground wasn't good enough, and whether the resultant storm still gives me nightmares, but it paled to one install I did in a small city in South Carolina. I arrived at the start of the scheduled installation week, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go. As we descended into the intended phone room, I became quickly aware of the technological revelation that we were bringing to this store. Sitting outside the phone room was the current phone console, with the operator wearing a headset and very literally switching and connecting calls like you see in old movies. plugging and unplugging cables in an upright patch panel. Keep in mind that this was the late 80s. From the room next to her, our destination, I heard a steady clack, clack, clack of machinery. Upon entry, I discovered that the phone system was the old-style stepping switch equipment. The noise in the room was deafening, and relays and contacts continually made and released. My interest in the antiquated equipment was, however, dampened by the condition of the room. They had mounted the plywood on the wall that we required for our 66 blocks wiring points, and the electrical power has been pulled into the room. But that was it. There was no ground bar, no power, the room was at least 90 degrees, and worst of all, the floor was covered in such a thick layer of dirt and dust that we were leaving footprints as we walked. I immediately informed our customer contact that this was not acceptable and why, and after I left a specific list of items that needed to be done before I returned, I drove back to the airport to return home. A week later I returned to the site, and things were better, marginally. The floor had been wet mopped, so that parts of it were now at least clean enough to see the tile, but other sections were covered with dried mud, where the mop water and floor dirt combined and settled down together. The ground and electrical still hadn't been done, and the HVAC contractor was there giving a quote for putting AC in the room. The room was still unusable, and the client wasn't happy when I told him as much. We had one more quick meeting going over the problems, and handwritten copies of the requirements were given to everyone involved, and a few people that weren't. Since the floor in that spot was relatively clean, I uncrated and moved the phone switch, the main cabinet with the phone system, in this case about 6x6x3, into position and mounted some of my equipment on the wall. I then returned home for another week. 1 week later, I was on site in the store's basement again, and this time was pleasantly surprised to feel a blast of cool air hit me in the face as I opened the door. The floor had been decently cleaned and looked good. My pleasure started slipping as I walked through the room, however. The electrical source still was not terminated. I saw no ground bar on the wall. The air conditioning had been lovingly and professionally installed, complete with an open-top drip pan, directly over the top of my $200,000 phone system. My imagination didn't have to work hard to figure out where that condensation was going to the first time that the drip pan clogged, and the pan overflowed, and the realization wasn't good. Calming myself, I asked about the 208-volt power. The building engineer replied that they had tried and were unable to find that particular NEMA connector anywhere. I grabbed the nearest phone book, remember it's the 80s, specifically the Yellow Pages, and found an electrical supply store within walking distance. I left the store and walked down to the supplier, who quickly sold me the necessary electrical connector. I took it back and tossed it to the engineer with a jaunty, "There you go." Then I addressed the last item on my list. "Where's the ground?" I asked. The engineer pointed me to a large 1 to 1.5 inch braided copper cable mounted in the corner. It disappeared into holes in the floor and the ceiling. "Okay," I said, pointing to the hole in the floor. "Where does that go?" I asked. "To a 6-foot ground rod under the building," the engineer replied proudly. "Excellent," I replied. "And where does that go?" I asked, pointing to the hole in the ceiling that the cable disappeared into. "To the lightning rods on the roof," he replied. He wanted me to connect this new $200,000 phone system and every phone in the building to the lightning rods on the roof. We didn't do the installation that weekend either. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Terrific Tales of Technology, episode 26. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do share it with your friends and family and loved ones, and all your various social medias. I appreciate it when you do that. If you would like to get your hands on some Hellfreezer merchandise, if you click in the description, there's a link that will take you to the Hellfreezer Teespring store. You can also find my Patreon link in there too, if you'd like to support me that way. It's not tiered, it's just basically if you'd like to support the channel, as we are daily here. Okay, now, Right, now last week I did a story by a Reddit user called Hold On, It Gets Better. They did ask for a shout out for a story, but I'd already put the video up by that point, so it only came in today. In their words, a non-shitty NPO, and their name was Solemn. Or Solemn. Yeah, I think Solemn. So, shout out to you, Solemn Bud. You're good people. Okay, before we go, we have a little birthday shout out to do. We have a little birthday shout out to do. And this one goes to John, I think. I believe. I had this prepared a second ago. That's fine, we'll find out again. Okay, yeah, this one goes to John, and John's birthday is today, February the 19th. He's turning 60. Excellent stuff. I hope you're having a great birthday today, John. I have to remember, I actually have my sister's birthday next week, next Wednesday. I've got her card, I'll just need to fill it out. I won't be saying happy birthday to her, though. That'd be weird. However, I will sing happy birthday to John before I go. Because it's a great name. A noble name, a fine name. Maybe I'm a little biased. Anyway. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you. Alrighty, I think we'll wrap things up there for now. And, the other day I was saying, hopefully the bots, so they'll get less. Yeah, well, we had a couple of racist ones in while I was recording on this stream. Thankfully, I've got mods there to help keep an eye on things now. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.